For most of my life, I thought being hard on myself was something that I'm supposed to do for some reason. I thought it meant that I cared. I thought it meant that I was responsible. I thought it meant that I was taking my life seriously. If I messed something up, it would immediately turn that frustration inward. If I was late on a bill, I'd beat myself up. If I made a mistake, I'd replay it in my head for days. If something wasn't working out the way that I wanted it to, I'd act like it was evidence that I was failing at life. And what's funny is that I genuinely believed this was helping me somehow. I thought like all of that pressure was somehow keeping me on track. I thought all of that worrying was making me a better person. I thought all of that self criticism was somehow motivating me. Looking back, I realized that none of that was actually true because eventually I started noticing something. The situations themselves weren't always that bad. I mean, a bill being late is annoying, a setback is frustrating, an unexpected expense sucks. None of those things are particularly enjoyable, but what was making them unbearable was everything I was piling on top of them. The problem would happen, and then I'd immediately start building an entire story around it. Now I'm behind. Now everything is falling apart. Now I'm never going to get caught up. Now I've ruined everything. Now I'm a failure. The actual issue might have taken 10 minutes to deal with. The emotional punishment would continue for days. At some point, I had a moment where I stopped and asked myself a question that seems really obvious now. Why am I doing this to myself? Like, seriously, what am I even getting out of this? If the bill needs to be paid, then it needs to be paid. If I made a mistake, then I need to figure out what happened and how to fix it. If something needs my attention, then I'll give it my attention. But where exactly does the self hatred fit into that process or the self flagellation? How is that helping? What problem is it solving? Because when I really looked at it, I couldn't come up with an answer. Being hard on myself wasn't paying the bill somehow, it wasn't fixing the mistake, and it wasn't creating a solution. It was just making me miserable while I handled whatever was already in front of me anyway. I think many people grow up believing that suffering is somehow proof that they're trying. Like, if you're stressed, that means you care. If you're anxious, that means you're responsible. If you're constantly worried, that means you're taking things seriously. But those things aren't automatically connected. You can care deeply about your life without tormenting yourself. You can take responsibility for your choices without treating yourself like an enemy. You can recognize that something needs to change without turning it into a verdict on your worth as a human being. Those are completely different things. One day I realized that I was acting like every mistake needed a punishment, not a consequence, like a punishment. And that there is a difference between those two things. Consequences are just reality. If you miss a payment, there might be a fee. You show up late to something, someone might be annoyed. You make a poor decision, you have to deal with whatever the results are of said decision. That's just life. Punishment is all the extra stuff we invent, the shame, the insults, the internal lectures, the endless replaying of what happened. The belief that if we feel bad enough for long enough, somehow we've earned some sort of forgiveness. But reality doesn't actually work that way, and feeling terrible doesn't erase a mistake. It just means now you're carrying two problems instead of one, the original issue and the emotional weight you've attached to it. Once I saw that, everything changed in my head. I stopped asking myself how bad I should feel about this and started asking, okay, what needs to happen next? That's a much more useful question because it keeps you focused on reality instead of spiraling into a story. A lot of the things that I used to lose sleep over ended up resolving themselves anyway. And it wasn't because I ignored them or stopped caring. It was just because I handled them when I could handle them. And until then, there really wasn't much else to do about it. I think that's what I've learned as I've gotten older. Most situations don't actually require panic or self condemnation, But most situations do require patience. Sometimes they require a phone call. Sometimes they require a difficult conversation. Sometimes they require accepting that things aren't perfect right now. But very few situations, if any, I mean, I don't even know if I could even think of one, are improved by sitting around convincing yourself that you're a terrible person. I wasted so much energy carrying things that didn't need to be carried. Not the actual responsibilities, the judgment, the fear, the constant pressure I was putting on myself to somehow be flawless. And the strange thing is that, interestingly enough, when I stopped doing that, life became easier. And it's actually not strange. I was being totally sarcastic. And it's not because my problems disappeared. I still have problems. Everybody does. Life throws unexpected things at me. Plans still fall apart. Money still gets tight sometimes. Things still go wrong. The difference is that now when something happens, I just try to deal with the thing itself instead of creating an entire emotional crisis around it. And it doesn't necessarily define anything about my worth. I don't need to make every challenge mean something about who I am. I don't need to treat every setback like a personal failure. I don't need to spend hours arguing with reality. The situation is already what it is. My opinion about it certainly doesn't change that. What does help is staying grounded long enough to respond to what's actually happening. And that's been one of the most freeing realizations that I've ever had. Because life is already hard enough at times. There are enough obstacles and disappointments and things that are outside of our control. I don't need to volunteer to become one more thing working against myself. These days, I try to be on my own side. And it's because I finally learned that treating myself with basic compassion gets me a lot further than treating myself like a punching bag ever did or even ever could have. And if that's something that you've been doing to yourself for years, maybe it's worth asking the same question I eventually asked myself. Why? What is all of that self-punishment actually accomplishing? And if the answer is nothing, maybe you're allowed to put it down.